Hello and welcome to the Bot Box. We delve into the realm of physics this week with a ring spinner, Mr. Speed Squared. It was invertible, so it needed no remake, but it could have probably done with one. As in its first appearance anyway, it had no armour on one side due to weight restrictions. With armour on both sides, they'd have gone over the 110 kilogram weight limit. And as for the physics, well, the name comes from the equation from how fast that unfriendly spinner spins. Mass times radius squared equals speed. This isn't something that came up in physics class, I have to say. Mr. Speed Squared made its debut in Series 8 Heat B and drew Lifter Foxic, Crusher Draven, and Thwackbot Chimera. Mr. Speed Squared had Draven in its sights. Draven was scared of them. And of course, Chimera had large, exposed tyres. All in all, a friendly draw for an unfriendly spinner. The first robot Mr. Speed Squared crossed paths with was Chimera, hitting one of the large exposed wheels. This caused it to half come off, leaving it at this kind of angle, and have a very unpleasant puncture that wasn't going to fix easily. Chimera ran away, but with its already low top speed and a wonky wheel, there was only one way this was going to end. And that was with Chimera's non-wonky wheel getting torn clean off. Mr. Speed Squared then went after Draven, hitting the Crusher twice. That was enough to take Draven out completely. So Mr. Speed Squared went through to the round robin stages. However, the robot was very poorly with bearings issues that would affect the spinner. They got it fixed in time to fight the hammer stroke axe of Thor. I've been waiting to bring this hammer out. Thor drove at Mr. Speed Squared, but it missed. On his second attempt, Thor hit Mr. Speed Squared and used his spinner to open the pit. Thor chased after Mr. Speed Squared, intending to ram it into walls, but ultimately ending the spinner in dead metal's clutches. And Mr. Speed Squared had only been in existence for 5 weeks, as it had been pointed out right. That why a certain commentator chose to quote the Bay City Rollers of all groups remains a mystery. It was on the radio. Cue Thor putting a hole in Mr. Speed Squared. Mr. Speed Squared then got released, only for it to get chased and pushed by Thor. Mr. Speed Squared met a lot of walls. Oh, and dead metal again. Then the blade started spinning, and the spinner got chased over the floor flipper. Both robots got tossed in the air, and Mr. Speed Squared landed upside down. Mr. Speed Squared got chased into Chunt's corner, where Thor got axed, but both robots escaped. So Mr. Speed Squared got hit on its bad side, which the floor flipper had very kindly exposed, and met more walls. The action took both robots close to the pit. Thor nearly drove in, but didn't. Mr. Speed Squared really did drive into the pit. Next up was Foxic. And I know what you're thinking. It's that fight. If it's any consolation, we won't have to talk about this one after this episode. Anyway, Mr. Speed Squared had a bent disc, but Team 4C were confident of going into battle with Foxic and causing serious damage, even if it was to Mr. Speed Squared, not Foxic. They were hoping the damage would be done to Foxic. The two robots did meet on the flame pit, but sadly avoided each other for most of the fight. Mr. Speed Squared spinner pretty much failed to spin. Foxic went after Dead Metal, but ended up having to deal with two house robots at the same time. Mr. Speed Squared opened the pit. The two robots bumped into each other twice, and then time ran out on the fight. It's not a battle for the ages. But, by split decision, Mr. Speed Squared won, so they got 2 points. After this fight, Mr. Speed Squared still had a chance of making the Heat final, where Thor would be their opponent. All they had to do was beat Shockwave, armed with the larger scoop, and which went all the way around the robot. There's a lifter. Shockwave had also been on the end of a Thor beating and had an injured driver as well. The injury did not affect the battle though. Anyway, just as a warning, a few things happened in this fight. Happened to Team 4C's previous entrant, Revenge of Trouble and Strife, way back in Series 7. I have prepared checklists to tick off these things. So, without further ado, the crunch fight. Shockwave shot off at once and shoved Mr. Speed Squared into a wall, followed by Kilot. So Mr. Speed Squared chilled out with the house robot as Shockwave opened the pit before returning the sickly spinner, pushing it into Dead Metal, where Mr. Speed Squared got sword and eventually released. Shockwave would not let them be though, and kept stacking, even though this came at the cost of one of their drive chains coming off. Ultimately, this led to Mr. Speed Squared being lifted up against an arena wall, resting on the edge of that blade. Also, it started venting the magic smoke, which is a sure sign of... Both of these things happened to Revenge of Trouble and Strife back in Series 7, though not in the same fight. So, this is what we've got so far on the checklist. Anyway, Shockwave had an attack of mercy and freed Mr. Speed Squared, only to be reunited for Mr. Speed Squared to be reunited with both house robots and getting turned on to its bad side. They escaped only for Shockwave to shove them into a wall and Dead Metal before Shockwave elected to pit Mr. Speed Squared. And then Shockwave nearly pitted themselves. On the third attempt, Shockwave did get Mr. Speed Squared into the pit and the spinner was out. And for those who've seen episode 21, you'll know what happened next. For those who haven't, Shockwave won the heat. So that's the third thing on the checklist ticked off. On side, magic smoke, or so it seems, and getting shoved in the heat by the surprise heat winners. At the pit by the surprise heat winners. I'm tying myself up in knots. So we go to Series 9. Well, like half of its heat. Mr. Speed Squared found home in Heat C. This time, Mr. Speed Squared was a lot flatter. Think pancake. They were also in an interesting situation. If they win Series 9, they'd have a trophy. If they lost, the team captain had vowed to marry his long-term girlfriend. The dual rotating wedge bot heavy metal, that one's a hard one to describe, retracting horizontal spinner expulsion, and old friends Foxic. The pit was opened early on, and Mr. Speed Squared hit expulsion before Foxic gave the ring spinner a nudge. Mr. Speed Squared was then out of focus briefly before it gave Foxic a hit and did a little gyro dance. Meanwhile, Foxic got flipped and immobilised. Mr. Speed Squared regained enough control to hit heavy metal and the now dead expulsion for getting too close to an arena spike and pinged away. But they were through. Next up was heavy metal. Fortunately, Mr. Speed Squared was healthy at this point. However, heavy metal then executed the perfect box rush and shoved the ring spinner into a wall. Heavy metal refused to leave Mr. Speed Squared alone, apart from when it got stuck on the edge of the pit. Mr. Speed Squared met a lot of walls, and the pit release tyre, as heavy metal opened the pit, using Mr. Speed Squared to do so. Oh, and they also met the floor flipper. This was no problem though, as Mr. Speed Squared was now armoured on both sides. Still, it never helps having shunt put a hole in the armour, which was exactly what happened next. So Mr. Speed Squared ran away, hoping to escape heavy metal, but it nearly pitted itself instead. When heavy metal caught up with them, Mr. Speed Squared got pitted. So did heavy metal. But because heavy metal was the aggressor and pushed Mr. Speed Squared into the pit, heavy metal won. And Mr. Speed Squared now had a poorly robot, which was not good news. Even the worse news was they were facing an old friend, Thor. Naturally, Thor went for Mr. Speed Squared and axed them relentlessly. Thor shoved Mr. Speed Squared into a wall, released it, and revealed the spinner was now very immobile. Cue more hammer blows and an immobility countdown. The batteries had died. So their fight against drum spinner concussion was partially for pride and partially to get some points on the board. But they were having trouble just getting the disc to spin. And to make matters worse, Concussion were planning on showing no mercy. When the battle started, Mr. Speed Squared was not moving in a controlled fashion. It was dancing, like spinning and going a bit haywire. It made it absolutely perfect for Concussion to send it flying. When they landed, the dancing stopped, as had the spinner. But Concussion were not keen on leaving their opponents be. So that was the cue for more hits. Mr. Speed Squared opened the pit. Concussion took the opportunity to try and pit Mr. Speed Squared, but it failed. Then Concussion sent Mr. Speed Squared to dead metal, from whence the ring spinner escaped. But it ended up with the kilowatt instead. The ring spinner ended up pretty dizzy as the kilowatt spun him around. And then he got used as a frisbee. When it landed, it got hit some more by Concussion and had another pit incident However, this time it was because Concussion was trying to shove them into the pit. Then the magic smoke emerged from Concussion. It was on fire. So the fight became pushing war as time ran out. The judges unanimously went for Concussion. With no points, Mr. Speed Squared were out, which meant, on the positive side, there was going to be a wedding in the Forsey family. They did not return for Series 10 though. However, Mr. Speed Squared did make a few cameos in Series 10, so yay! Mr. Speed Squared would have gone further had it not been for the gremlins. It was capable of so much more than what we saw. I don't know how it would have done if it hadn't been such a glass cannon. But I think Series 10's format would have suited it. It wouldn't have had to go through 3 fights just to get to the heat final. And with its destructive capabilities being most apparent in the first fight, it most likely would not have had to go through Robot Redemption, giving it less time to not work. Anyway, who's next? Will we be talking about a robot that did go through Robot Redemption? Or not? It's a very good question. Well, we aren't, because we're going to be talking about Constrictor. Until next week, Carlson244, out.